The question that followed me. Have you ever been sitting still, doing absolutely nothing, when a quiet question suddenly shows up in your mind and makes your heart pause for a second? Not a loud question. Not an angry one. Just a calm, simple sentence that refuses to leave you alone. 3 weeks ago, when I arrived in the United States, that question began to follow me. Everywhere. Why do Americans plan everything? And right after that, a harder one appeared. Do you live with intention? At first, I thought it was just a random thought. Jet lag. Culture shock. Too much thinking. But the truth is, that question did not come by accident. It came when I was tired. Tired of learning English for years and still feeling like an outsider. Tired of days passing by without knowing exactly where I was going. On my first day in America, I was standing in a small grocery store. The air was cold and dry, very different from what I was used to. A woman in front of me took out her phone, opened her calendar, checked something quickly, and only then added one more item to her cart. I accidentally saw her screen. Her entire week was planned. Every day had a shape, a direction. For reasons I could not explain at that moment, my chest felt a little tight. As the days passed, I started noticing something strange. Here, nothing seemed to happen just because. Coffee with a friend. Scheduled. Family dinner. Planned days ahead. Doctor appointment. Booked, confirmed, reminded. And me. I lived like this. Let's see how I feel today. My English learning was the same. Some days I studied. Some days I didn't. No plan. No rhythm. No clear reason. One evening, sitting quietly in my room, listening to the wind outside, that question came back again. Do you live with intention? This question is dangerous, because it doesn't demand an answer immediately. But if you stay silent long enough, it answers for you. I started thinking about people I know who gave up learning English. They weren't stupid. They weren't lazy. They were just lost. Your brain hates uncertainty. When you don't give it a clear purpose, it tries to save energy by making you feel bored, tired, or unmotivated. Psychology calls this cognitive overload. In simple words, when there is no plan, your brain shuts down before you even begin. In the US, I noticed the opposite. People don't learn English to be good at English. They learn it to use it. To make appointments. To explain feelings. To solve real problems. One morning, I was standing in line at a coffee shop. The person in front of me turned around, smiled, and said, "Busy morning, huh?" A very simple sentence. But my brain froze for a second. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wasn't used to being fully present in that moment. That was when it hit me. I wasn't just learning English without direction. I was living without direction. 3 weeks in America is not a long time. But it was long enough for me to see something clearly. Americans don't plan their lives to control everything. They plan their lives to feel calmer. When you know what you're doing tomorrow, your mind can rest. When you know why you're learning English today, your heart feels lighter. I started thinking about my marriage. The quiet moments. The misunderstandings we postponed because we'll talk later. And suddenly, I saw the pattern, no intention, no clarity. Living without a plan sounds free. But in reality, it makes you drift. And when you drift for too long, you become tired without knowing why. That question, do you live with intention, is not here to judge you. It waits patiently until you are ready to listen. If you're watching this video right now, maybe you are standing where I once stood. Tired. Confused. Thinking about giving up. But maybe what you're missing is not ability. Not intelligence. Not discipline. Maybe you just need a clear reason, a small intention, to keep going. 3 weeks, no accident. If you told me before coming to the United States that 3 weeks could change the way I see my life, I would probably smile and say, that sounds dramatic. But living it is different from imagining it. During these 3 weeks, something slowly became clear to me. In America, almost nothing happens by accident. Not the good things. Not the hard things. And definitely not the meaningful ones. At first, I thought people here were just rigid. Too organized. Too serious about time. Back home, life feels softer. If something doesn't happen today, maybe tomorrow. If a plan breaks, you laugh it off. Here, a broken plan feels like a small earthquake. The first time I noticed this was on my second day. I casually asked someone, do you want to grab coffee sometime? They smiled and said, sure. How about next Tuesday at 10:30? Not someday. Not we'll see. Next Tuesday. 10:30. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Over the next few days, I started paying attention. People didn't just wake up and hope the day would go well. They prepared for it. Weather checked the night before. Clothes chosen with intention. Meals planned, even simple ones. And I realized something uncomfortable. My life, especially my English learning, had been built on hope, not structure. Hope is beautiful, but it's fragile. Hope disappears the moment you feel tired. One morning, I woke up early because of jet lag. The sky outside was still dark blue. I made coffee and sat near the window. That quiet moment felt heavy, not peaceful. Because when life gets quiet, your thoughts get loud. I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. If nothing in my life changed, would I still be doing what I'm doing now? That's when the idea hit me. These 3 weeks weren't random. They were a mirror. In America, systems are everywhere. Work runs on systems. Families run on systems. Even rest is scheduled. At first, that sounded cold to me. But then I saw the other side. Because when life runs on systems, emotions get more space. When you don't have to decide everything all the time, your brain can breathe. Science actually supports this. Decision fatigue is real. The more unplanned choices you make in a day, the more exhausted your brain becomes. By evening, you feel tired without doing anything big. That explained so much about my English journey. Every day, I had to decide. Should I study today? What should I study? How long? Those questions drained me before I even opened a book. Here, I watched people remove those questions from their lives. They didn't rely on motivation. They relied on structure. One afternoon, I walked past a public library. Inside, people of all ages were sitting quietly, reading, typing, learning. Not because they were excited, but because it was part of their plan. That hit me harder than any motivational speech. I thought about my marriage again. About the arguments that didn't explode, but slowly eroded connection. Not because we didn't love each other, but because we didn't intentionally protect time, conversation, and understanding. In these 3 weeks, I noticed how couples here schedule time to talk. Not romantic dinners. Just time. Time to check in. Time to ask, are we okay? That felt strangely mature. And strangely kind. English started appearing differently too. Not as a subject, but as a tool woven into daily plans. Call the insurance company at 2. Email the school by Friday. Talk to the neighbor this evening. Simple sentences. Real English. Used with purpose. And suddenly, learning English felt less heavy. Because it was attached to life, not pressure. By the end of the second week, I stopped asking why Americans plan everything. I started asking why I hadn't done this sooner. Planning didn't make life boring. It made life quieter inside. You stop fighting your own mind. You stop negotiating with yourself every morning. 3 weeks passed quickly. But they left behind a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time, stability. Not excitement. Not happiness. Stability. And stability is underrated. If you're watching this and thinking, I don't have time to plan, I understand. But planning doesn't steal time. It gives it back. These 3 weeks taught me that intention is not about controlling life. It's about choosing where your energy goes. And once you choose, learning English and living stops feeling like a battle. It starts feeling like a direction. Weather taught me discipline. I didn't expect the weather to teach me anything. I thought climate was just background noise, something you complain about, then forget. But during these 3 weeks in the United States, the weather became one of my strictest teachers. On my first few mornings, I made the same mistake again and again. I woke up, looked outside, saw sunshine and thought, it's going to be a nice day. So I dressed lightly, casually, like I always used to. By the time I stepped outside, the wind corrected me. Not aggressively. Just enough to make my body tense up, and my thoughts slow down. That's when I realized something simple but important. In many parts of America, you don't dress for how things look. You dress for how things will be. People here check the weather the night before. They plan their clothes, their routes, even their moods around it. Not because they are pessimistic, but because they respect reality. That felt very different from how I used to live. Back home, I often let the day decide for me. If it felt good, I moved fast. If it felt uncomfortable, I slowed down or avoided things. Weather didn't change my plan, because I didn't really have one. Here, the climate doesn't care about your mood. Cold mornings still arrive. Rain still falls. Wind still shows up without asking how you feel. And strangely, that made people calmer. One afternoon, the temperature dropped suddenly. I saw parents calmly adjusting their kids' jackets. People walking faster, not complaining. No drama. Just preparation. That was my first lesson. Discipline doesn't always come from ambition. Sometimes, it comes from environment. Psychology explains this well. When your environment is unpredictable, your brain looks for patterns to feel safe. Planning becomes a coping tool, not a personality trait. The weather here forces you to think ahead. And thinking ahead slowly rewires how you act in other parts of life, including learning English. On colder days, I noticed people stayed inside more. Libraries became warmer, fuller. Coffee shops turned into quiet workspaces. English wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical. People spoke simply, directly, to get through the day. I started paying attention to the words around me. Layer up. Chance of rain. Bundle up. Every phrase was connected to preparation. And it hit me. Language grows naturally where planning exists. When you plan, you need words. When you drift, you don't. One evening, I stood by the window again. This time, wearing the right sweater. The wind was strong, but I felt steady. That physical feeling stayed with me longer than expected. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was ready. That same mindset slowly moved into my marriage. Cold days made conversations shorter, quieter. Instead of pushing heavy talks into uncomfortable moments, we started choosing better timing. Not avoiding. Just being intentional. In many cultures, planning emotional conversations feels unnatural. Love is supposed to be spontaneous, right? But I began to see it differently. Spontaneity is beautiful. But stability keeps love alive. Weather taught me that. You don't wait for the storm to arrive to look for shelter. You prepare when the sky is still clear. My English learning changed too. On days I knew I would be tired, I didn't force long study sessions. I planned short ones. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Realistic. The brain responds better to certainty than intensity. That's not motivation talk, that's neuroscience. When your brain knows what's coming, it lowers resistance. When everything is vague, it pushes back. The climate here made vagueness uncomfortable. And discomfort, when consistent, teaches discipline. By the end of the 3rd week, checking the weather became automatic. Not stressful. Comforting. It was one less decision to argue with myself about. And that's when I understood something important. Americans don't plan because they're obsessed with control. They plan because life here requires respect for conditions. Weather. Time. Systems. Energy. Planning is not rigidity. It's cooperation with reality. If you're listening to this and thinking, my life doesn't allow that, I want you to pause. Every life has conditions. We just don't always listen to them. The weather didn't make me disciplined overnight. It nudged me. Day after day. Until preparation felt lighter than regret. And that's the quiet power of intention. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady enough to carry you forward. Americans don't improvise life. Before coming to the United States, I believed something very deeply. I believed that planning too much would kill the joy of living. That if everything was scheduled, life would feel mechanical, dry, predictable. I thought Americans planned so much because they were afraid of uncertainty. 3 weeks here quietly proved me wrong. What I saw was not fear. What I saw was trust. Americans don't improvise life the way I used to. They don't wake up hoping the day will somehow work itself out. They assume responsibility for the day before it arrives. At first, this felt uncomfortable to watch. One morning, I visited a couple we knew. Nothing special. Just a casual visit. But even that had a shape. We agreed on a time. We agreed on how long we'd stay. We even agreed, gently, on when the visit would end. Back home, that might feel cold. Here, it felt respectful. No one was guessing. No one was waiting silently for the other person to leave. Everyone knew where the edges were. And that's when I realized something important. Improvisation sounds romantic, but it often hides avoidance. When you improvise everything, you don't have to commit. You don't have to decide. You don't have to face the fear of choosing wrong. Planning forces you to choose. And choosing is uncomfortable, especially when you're tired. I saw this clearly in how people handled small things. Groceries were not random. Weekdays had themes. Mondays looked different from Fridays. Life here had rhythm. And rhythm creates safety. From a psychological point of view, this makes sense. The human brain craves predictability. Not excitement, predictability. When your environment is predictable, your nervous system relaxes. When your nervous system relaxes, learning becomes easier. That includes learning English. I noticed that conversations here were rarely chaotic. People spoke with a purpose. They asked clear questions. They answered clearly. English wasn't decorative. It was functional. Let's meet at 6. I'll call you tomorrow. We need to decide by Friday. Simple sentences. Clear time frames. That clarity made the language feel lighter. No guessing. No reading between the lines. I thought about how I used to practice English. Random videos. Random motivation. Random bursts of effort. Improvised learning. And I wondered why it never lasted. One evening, my partner and I sat at the kitchen table. No argument. No drama. Just tired. Instead of saying, "We'll talk about it later," we did something different. We chose a time. Tomorrow evening. After dinner. That small decision changed everything. Because once the conversation had a place, It stopped floating in our minds. We could breathe. This is something Americans understand well. They don't solve emotional problems by feeling harder. They solve them by giving them structure. Structure doesn't remove emotion. It protects it. I used to think love should always be spontaneous. But watching families here taught me another version of love. A quieter one. Love that shows up on time. Love that remembers schedules. Love that plans for hard conversations instead of avoiding them. That kind of love survives weather changes. Mood changes. Life changes. And again. English was right there in the middle of it. Not fancy. Not perfect. Just enough words to make life move forward. I started copying that approach. I didn't feel like practicing English every day. So I stopped waiting for the feeling. I picked a time. A short time. And I kept it. 5 minutes of reading. 1 short conversation. 1 small intention. The resistance dropped almost immediately. Because the brain relaxes when it knows the rules. Improvisation keeps the brain alert. Planning lets it rest. That's the part no one tells you. Americans don't plan everything because they are obsessed with productivity. They plan because they value calm. Calm mornings. Calm conversations. Calm learning. Life here is not less emotional. It's less chaotic. And that difference matters. By the end of the 3rd week, I noticed I stopped asking, "What should I do today?" The question disappeared. In its place was something quieter. Let me do what I already decided. That mental shift saved energy I didn't know I was wasting. If you're listening and thinking, "My life is too messy to plan," I get it. Messy lives need planning more than perfect ones. Planning doesn't mean predicting everything. It means deciding what deserves your attention. Americans don't improvise life because improvisation is expensive. It costs mental energy, emotional energy, relationship energy. Planning is not about control. It's about kindness toward yourself and others. And once I understood that, the title question stopped sounding strange. Why do Americans plan everything? Because they want to spend less time surviving the day. And more time actually living it. When I lived without direction, there was a time in my life when I thought freedom meant having no plan. No fixed schedule. No clear destination. Just waking up and seeing where the day would take me. For a long time, I told myself that this was a good way to live. Flexible. Open. Easygoing. I said I didn't want to be boxed in by routines or expectations. But 3 weeks in, the United States forced me to look at that belief honestly. Because what I used to call freedom was actually something else. It was drifting. When you live without direction, days feel light at first. There's no pressure to perform. No urgency to decide. But slowly, something changes. Time starts slipping through your hands. You're always busy, yet nothing really moves forward. That was my life before. I woke up tired, even after sleeping enough. I told myself I would study English later. Later became tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Next week quietly disappeared. I wasn't lazy. I was lost. And being lost is exhausting. In psychology, there's a simple idea. When the brain doesn't know what matters, it treats everything as a threat. Every decision feels heavy. Every choice feels risky. That was me. Even small questions drained me. Should I study now or rest? Should I watch another video or practice speaking? Should I try again today, or start fresh tomorrow? Living without direction means you negotiate with yourself all day long. And those negotiations never end well. Here in the US, that contrast became painfully clear. I watched people move through their days with quiet confidence. Not rushing. Not stressed. Just certain. They didn't look happier all the time. But they looked grounded. One afternoon, I sat alone in a park. Cold air. Gray sky. People walked by with purpose, walking dogs, pushing strollers, heading somewhere specific. And I asked myself a hard question. If someone asked me where I was going in life, what would I say? Before, I would have answered with vague words. I'm figuring it out. I'm exploring. I'm working on myself. Those answers sound deep. But they hide confusion. Direction doesn't have to be big. It just has to be real. I saw this clearly in how Americans approached English. Many immigrants I met didn't speak perfectly. Some made grammar mistakes constantly. But they spoke anyway. Because they knew why they were speaking. To solve a problem. To help their kids. To survive work. Their direction was clear, even if their language wasn't. Back when I lived without direction, English felt like an endless mountain. No peak. No milestones. Here, English became a road. You don't need to see the whole road. You just need to know where the next turn is. My marriage reflected the same pattern. When you don't decide what kind of relationship you want to build, you end up reacting instead of creating. Arguments weren't dramatic. They were quiet and unresolved. We postponed conversations, thinking silence was peace. But silence without intention turns into distance. In these 3 weeks, I realized something uncomfortable. Direction is not pressure. It's relief. When you decide what matters, everything else becomes easier to ignore. Neuroscience supports this too. The brain feels safer when goals are defined, even if they are small. Clear goals reduce anxiety. Vague hopes increase it. That explained why my go-with-the-flow lifestyle made me anxious instead of free. Flow only works when there's a riverbank. Without direction, flow becomes flooding. I started making small decisions. Nothing dramatic. What time I would practice English. How long. What I would focus on. 5 minutes. 1 page. 1 real-life sentence. And something strange happened. The resistance softened. Not because I suddenly loved studying, but because my brain stopped fighting uncertainty. Direction gave my energy a place to land. I also noticed how Americans talk about the future. Not in dreams. In plans. I'll do it next week. Let's decide by Friday. We'll revisit this next month. Those phrases are simple English, but they carry something powerful: commitment. Living without direction protects you from disappointment, but it also protects you from progress. You can't fail at a goal you never choose, but you also can't succeed. By the end of my third week, I stopped romanticizing my old lifestyle. I saw it clearly for what it was. Not freedom. Avoidance. Avoidance of choice. Avoidance of responsibility. Avoidance of discomfort. Direction doesn't guarantee happiness, but it gives meaning to effort. An effort without meaning is what breaks people. If you're listening to this and thinking, I don't know my direction, that's okay. You don't need a life plan. You don't need a 5-year vision. You just need one honest answer to this question. What deserves my attention today? Once you answer that, even quietly, you're no longer drifting. You're moving. And that changes everything. Love, I thought, should be spontaneous, emotional, free. 3 weeks in the United States quietly challenged that belief, not through theory, but through daily life. Because here, I saw something unexpected. Love wasn't louder. It wasn't more romantic. But it was steadier. And that steadiness came from something I used to avoid: intention. In my own marriage, I often relied on feelings to guide everything. If we felt close, we talked. If we felt tired, we avoided. If things felt uncomfortable, we waited. Waiting felt gentle. But over time, waiting created distance. Unspoken words don't disappear. They settle. One evening during my first week here, my partner and I were sitting across from each other at the table. No argument. No smiles either. Just that quiet tension couples know too well. In the past, I would have said, let's not ruin the night. And we would have stayed silent. But that night, something different happened. We looked at each other and said, let's talk tomorrow evening. After dinner. Nothing emotional. Nothing dramatic. Just a time. That small decision changed the energy instantly. Because once a conversation has a place, it stops haunting you. In America, I noticed couples do this naturally. They don't wait for the perfect emotional moment. They create space for conversations. Even hard ones. Not because they love less, but because they respect the relationship more. This goes against many romantic ideas we grow up with. We're told love should be effortless. That if you need to plan, something is wrong. But effortlessly is a myth. Psychology says relationships thrive not on intensity, but on predictability. When your nervous system knows what to expect, it feels safe. And safety allows closeness. Uncertainty creates distance, even in love. I saw this clearly in small American family moments. Parents planning time with their kids. Couples scheduling walks together. Not as a task, as a priority. Love here had a calendar. At first, that sounded unromantic to me. Then I realized something important. You don't plan love because it's weak. You plan love because life is strong. Work gets busy. Energy drops. Stress arrives uninvited. Without intention, love becomes whatever is left over. And leftovers don't nourish anyone. This realization hit me deeply when I connected it to language. English conversations in relationships here were simple. Clear. Honest. I need to talk. Can we set aside time? I'm not okay today. No poetry. No drama. Just words that carry responsibility. Back when my marriage felt stuck, language failed us. Not because we lacked vocabulary, but because we lacked clarity. Learning English while watching this changed everything. Language isn't about sounding good. It's about being understood. And understanding requires intention. During these 3 weeks, my partner and I started doing something new. We planned check-ins. Short ones. 10 minutes. Sometimes awkward. Sometimes quiet. But consistent. And consistency softened things that passion couldn't fix. Neuroscience explains this too. The brain releases more trust hormones during predictable positive interactions than during rare intense ones. In simple terms, love grows through repetition, not surprise. That applies to language learning as well. You don't improve English by waiting for inspiration. You improve it by showing up regularly, imperfectly. Americans understand this connection well. They plan their relationships the way they plan their learning. With patience. With boundaries. With respect for energy. I realized that many of my past arguments weren't about love. They were about unmet expectations. And unmet expectations often come from unspoken plans. When nothing is agreed upon, everything becomes personal. 3 weeks ago, I thought planning would kill romance. Now I see it does the opposite. Planning removes resentment. It protects affection. It gives emotions room to breathe. One night, after a simple planned conversation, we sat quietly again. But this time, the silence felt different. Not heavy. Not distant. Restful. That's when I understood something clearly. Love without intention survives only when life is easy. Love with intention survives life. If you're listening to this and thinking, my relationship shouldn't need planning, I gently invite you to question that. You plan work because it matters. You plan health because it matters. Why should love be the only thing left to chance? Planning doesn't make love mechanical. It makes it reliable. And reliability is what carries relationships through cold weeks, busy seasons, and emotional fatigue. In these 3 weeks, I didn't fall in love again. I didn't fix everything. But I learned how love actually lasts. Not through grand gestures. Not through perfect words. But through small, intentional choices made before things fall apart. Love needs a plan. Not because it's fragile, but because it's worth protecting. Silence between two cultures. Silence sounds the same everywhere, but it doesn't mean the same thing. I learned that slowly, over these 3 weeks in the United States. Through moments that were quiet on the surface and loud underneath. Back home, silence can be polite. It can mean respect. It can mean, I don't want to make this uncomfortable. Here, I discovered another kind of silence. A silence that asks questions. A silence that waits for clarity. At first, this difference confused me. There were moments when conversation stopped. And I thought everything was fine. No arguing. No raised voices. Just quiet. But later, I realized something was missing. In one small moment, this became very clear. I was talking with someone about plans for the weekend. I nodded. I smiled. I didn't fully understand one part, but I stayed quiet. The conversation moved on. Later that day, the plan happened, and I wasn't ready. Wrong time. Wrong place. No one was angry. But I felt exposed. That's when I realized. In this culture, silence is often read as agreement. Not as politeness. Not as patience. Agreement. That realization stayed with me. Between cultures, silence can quietly create distance. Not because people don't care, but because they assume different things. In my marriage, this difference became even more obvious. There were moments when I thought staying quiet was kind. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to add pressure. But silence didn't reduce tension. It stored it. I began noticing how Americans handle these moments. They speak earlier. Not louder, earlier. They say things like, I'm not sure I understand. I need a minute to think. That doesn't work for me. Simple English. No emotional decoration. And it hit me. They use language to prevent damage, not to repair it later. That's a powerful difference. Psychologically, this makes sense. Unspoken thoughts don't disappear. They stay active in the brain, creating background stress. When you speak something out loud, even imperfectly, your nervous system relaxes. Clarity calms the body. Silence, when misunderstood, does the opposite. In these 3 weeks, I became more aware of my own habits. How often I stayed quiet to avoid discomfort. How often I hoped the other person would just know. But hoping is not communication. Language exists for a reason. This became part of my English learning without me realizing it. I stopped trying to sound correct. I focused on being clear. I don't understand yet. Can you explain again? I need time. These sentences are not advanced English. But they carry honesty. One evening, my partner and I were walking outside. Cold air. Quiet street. Normally, we would walk in silence, each lost in thought. This time, I said something simple. I feel a little far from you today. No accusation. No drama. Just truth. The conversation that followed wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that changed the tone of the entire evening. Between two cultures, silence can be a dangerous comfort. It feels safe in the moment. But it builds invisible walls. I saw this in families too. Parents encouraging children to speak clearly. To ask questions. To say no. Silence was not praised as obedience. Clarity was praised as responsibility. That was new to me. It also explained why Americans plan so much. Planning requires saying things out loud. It forces clarity before confusion grows. When you plan, silence has less power. You don't leave space for guessing. You don't assume feelings. You decide together. This shifted how I saw English again. English is not about sounding fluent. It's about reducing misunderstanding. Fluency without clarity still creates distance. I noticed that when I spoke less perfectly, but more honestly, conversations became warmer. People leaned in. They helped. They adjusted. Silence had kept me invisible. Imperfect language made me present. In my old mindset, silence felt like control. Now I see it was avoidance. Avoidance of being seen. Avoidance of being misunderstood. Avoidance of responsibility. But life between cultures doesn't reward avoidance. It rewards participation. 3 weeks ago, silence felt safer than speaking broken English. Now, broken English feels safer than silence. Because silence carries assumptions. Words carry intention. And intention changes relationships. If you're listening to this and you often stay quiet, in conversations, in learning, in love, I want you to hear this gently. Silence is not neutral. Sometimes it protects. Sometimes it separates. The difference lies in intention. In this country, I learned that speaking early, even awkwardly, is an act of care. Not confrontation. Clarity is kindness here. And once I understood that, silence stopped feeling like peace. It started feeling like a question. A question that asks, are you really here with me, or just nearby? Learning English, living abroad, loving across cultures, all of it comes back to this. Presence matters more than perfection. And presence begins the moment you choose words over silence. Family runs on intention. Before coming to the United States, I thought family life happened naturally. You live together. You eat together when you can. You talk when something feels wrong. I believed love would fill the gaps where planning was missing. 3 weeks here gently showed me another truth. Family doesn't run on love alone. It runs on intention. I didn't learn this from books or advice. I learned it by watching ordinary families do very ordinary things, with surprising care. One afternoon, I visited a home where nothing special was happening. No celebration. No guests. Just a normal weekday. Yet everything had a quiet order. Dinner time wasn't loud, but it was clear. Homework had a place. Phones were put away without arguments. Not because the kids were perfect, but because expectations were spoken before emotions exploded. That moment stayed with me. Back home, family time often depended on mood. If everyone felt okay, things flowed. If someone was tired or stressed, connection disappeared. No one planned disconnection. But no one prevented it either. Here, I saw families actively protecting small moments. 15 minutes together. A walk after dinner. A short conversation before bed. Not dramatic. Not Instagram-worthy. But consistent. Psychology explains why this matters. Children and adults feel safer when they know what to expect. Predictability lowers anxiety. Lower anxiety creates space for connection. This doesn't make families rigid. It makes them resilient. I noticed how parents here talk to their children. Simple language. Clear boundaries. We eat at 6. Homework comes first. Let's talk after dinner. Not shouted. Not negotiated endlessly. Structure was not punishment. It was care. This made me reflect on my own family life. How many conversations did we postpone because now isn't a good time? How many moments did we miss because no one claimed them? In families without intention, love waits. In families with intention, love shows up. Language played a quiet role in all of this. English spoken in families here wasn't perfect. It was practical. Parents didn't lecture. They clarified. Kids weren't expected to guess. They were taught to ask. That clarity reduced conflict before it started. I began to understand why Americans plan so much. Planning in families isn't about control. It's about reducing emotional chaos. When expectations are clear, emotions don't have to fight for attention. This realization hit me deeply one evening. My partner and I were tired. The day had been long. In the past, we might have eaten separately, scrolled phones, gone quiet. Instead, we did something small but intentional. We sat together, just for 10 minutes. No problem solving. No deep talk. Just presence. That moment felt stronger than hours of passive togetherness. Family connection doesn't require energy. It requires priority. Neuroscience supports this too. Short, predictable positive interactions build stronger emotional bonds than long, unpredictable ones. In simple words, consistency beats intensity. That applies to parenting, to marriage, to learning English. I noticed how children here learn language naturally within structure. Story time at the same hour. Bedtime conversations. Daily routines. Language grows where repetition lives. Chaos doesn't teach well. Stability does. I realized something uncomfortable. I used to wait for the right moment to connect. But the right moment rarely arrives on its own. In American families, moments are chosen, claimed, protected. And that makes all the difference. This doesn't mean families here are always happy. They argue. They struggle. They get tired. But they recover faster. Because intention creates a framework for repair. When you know dinner is always together, a bad afternoon doesn't feel like rejection. When you know conversations are planned, silence doesn't feel like abandonment. Structure reduces emotional guessing. Guessing is exhausting. I also noticed how families schedule rest. Rest wasn't earned only after exhaustion. It was built in. That alone changed how I saw family health. Burnt-out people can't connect well. Planning protects energy for relationships. Slowly. I started copying these patterns. Not perfectly. Not rigidly. Just intentionally. Choosing moments instead of waiting for them. And something softened. Family didn't feel like another responsibility. It felt like a place to land. If you're listening to this and thinking, my family is too busy for planning, I want to offer this gently. Busy families need intention the most. Without it, time passes, but connection doesn't. Family doesn't collapse because of big problems. It fades because of unclaimed moments. Americans don't plan family life because they lack emotion. They plan because they value it. Love without intention survives on luck. Love with intention survives on purpose. In these 3 weeks, I learned that family isn't something you fit into life. It's something you design space for. And when you do, even small moments become enough. That's not discipline. That's devotion. Quiet. Steady. Intentional. When silence speaks louder than words. In my first weeks here, I talked a lot. I explained myself carefully. I chose words slowly, afraid of mistakes. I believed communication was about speaking correctly. But America taught me something unexpected. Silence is also a language. At first, the silence made me uncomfortable. In conversations, Americans often paused. They didn't rush to fill the space. They let moments breathe. Back home, silence usually meant trouble. Someone was angry. Someone was disappointed. Someone was waiting for the other person to speak. First, silence felt heavy. Here, silence felt neutral. Not cold. Not distant. Just present. I noticed it during small interactions. In cafes, after placing an order, the cashier might pause. Look at you and simply wait. Not impatient. Not distracted. Waiting. In meetings, someone would finish speaking, and no one jumped in immediately. A few seconds passed. Thoughts settled. At first, I thought they hadn't understood. Or maybe they didn't care. I was wrong. They were listening. Psychologists say silence allows the brain to process emotional meaning, not just words. When silence is safe, people feel less pressure to perform. That safety changes everything. I began to see how Americans use silence to respect boundaries. If someone doesn't answer right away, it's not rejection. It's space. If a conversation slows down, it's not failure. It's reflection. This was hard for me to learn. I came from a place where you prove care by responding quickly. By explaining. By reassuring again and again. Here, care sometimes looks like restraint. One evening, I shared something personal with a friend. Not dramatic. Just something honest. They didn't interrupt. They didn't offer advice right away. They nodded. Stayed quiet. For a moment, I felt exposed. Like I had said too much. Then they spoke, slowly, thoughtfully. That response felt deeper than instant comfort ever had. Silence gave weight to the words that followed. I also noticed how silence works in conflict. Back home, arguments escalate fast. Words pile up. Volume increases. Here, disagreements often slow down instead. People stop talking before they say something irreversible. They step away. They come back later. Silence becomes a break, not a weapon. This doesn't mean Americans avoid conflict. They just don't believe every emotion needs immediate expression. That idea changed how I handle frustration. Instead of explaining myself repeatedly, I learned to pause. Instead of defending instantly, I learned to breathe. Silence gave me control I didn't know I lacked. There's neuroscience behind this too. When emotions spike, the brain's language center becomes less effective. Pausing allows rational thought to return. In simple terms, silence prevents regret. I saw this pattern in families as well. Parents didn't respond to every complaint. Children weren't rushed to explain themselves. Silence created room for self-regulation. That doesn't mean ignoring. It means trusting the moment. I realized how often I used words to manage my own anxiety, not to communicate clearly. Talking fast made me feel safe. Silence forced me to sit with uncertainty. But uncertainty isn't dangerous. It's just unfamiliar. In learning English, this lesson mattered deeply. I stopped apologizing for pauses. I stopped filling gaps with unnecessary words. I let sentences end. I let thoughts rest. Ironically, my English became clearer when I spoke less. Listeners leaned in more. My words carried more intention. Silence sharpened language. This was especially true in emotional conversations. Instead of over-explaining, I learned to say one honest sentence and stop. The space after it did the rest. Silence allowed truth to land. I also learned that silence is not always comfortable. And that's okay. Growth rarely is. There were moments when silence exposed feelings I had buried under noise. Loneliness, homesickness, doubt. Without constant talking, those emotions surfaced. But facing them quietly made them smaller, not bigger. Silence turned fear into information. I began to appreciate quiet moments. Driving without music. Walking without headphones. Sitting without scrolling. Those spaces became conversations with myself. In a culture that values productivity, Americans surprisingly protect quiet. Libraries are sacred. Personal space is respected. Downtime is defended. Silence is not emptiness here. It's maintenance. I used to think connection required constant interaction. Now I see it also requires space. Two people sitting quietly together can be deeply connected if silence is safe. That safety doesn't happen by accident. It's built through respect. Respect for thoughts. For boundaries. For timing. This lesson softened my relationships. I stopped demanding immediate responses. I stopped interpreting pauses as rejection. I gave people room, and felt more room inside myself. Silence taught me patience. Not the forced kind. The trusting kind. If you're listening and silence feels uncomfortable to you, I understand. It once felt unbearable to me too. But silence is not the absence of meaning. It's where meaning waits. Words are powerful. But silence decides which words matter. In America, I didn't just learn how to speak English. I learned when not to speak at all. And that changed how I listen, not just to others, but to myself. Sometimes, the most honest response is a pause. And sometimes, that pause says everything. The day I stopped rushing my life. There was a morning, about 2 weeks into my stay in the US, when nothing special happened. No big event. No emotional conversation. No breakthrough moment. And yet, that morning stayed with me. I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of an alarm. My body just woke up. The room was quiet. The light outside was soft, almost shy. For the first time in a long while, I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I sat on the edge of the bed and did nothing. Back home, doing nothing always felt wrong. Like wasted time. Like falling behind. But that morning, doing nothing felt complete. Later, while making coffee, I noticed something small. The water took longer to boil than I expected. My old self would have checked messages, scrolled, filled the gap. Instead, I watched the steam rise slowly. That's when it hit me. I had been rushing my life for years, without knowing where I was going. In America, people move fast. But their lives don't feel rushed. That sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. They walk quickly, speak directly, schedule tightly. But inside, there's less panic. Because when you plan with intention, speed doesn't equal chaos. I realized I had confused urgency with importance. Everything felt urgent to me. Replies. Progress. Results. But urgency without direction is just noise. That morning, I thought about my marriage. How many arguments started not because of big problems, but because we were tired? How many misunderstandings came from rushing to conclusions? We weren't failing at love. We were rushing through it. In the US, I noticed couples protecting slow moments. Weekend walks. Long breakfasts. Quiet drives. They weren't lazy. They were intentional. Psychologists say the nervous system needs predictability to feel safe. When everything feels rushed, the body stays in survival mode. That survival mode slowly damages relationships. You snap faster. You listen less. You defend more. I saw myself clearly in that mirror, and it wasn't comfortable. I thought about how I learned English. Always rushing to sound fluent. To speak fast. To prove something. But fluency isn't speed. It's clarity. Native speakers don't rush words to impress. They pause to be understood. When I stopped rushing my English, people understood me better. When I stopped rushing conversations, people opened up more. Rushing, I learned, is a form of fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being enough. Fear of silence. That morning, I decided to test something small. For one day, I would stop rushing, just a little. I walked slower. I ate without multitasking. I listened without planning my response. Nothing dramatic happened. But everything felt heavier. More real. I noticed details I usually missed. The tone in someone's voice. The way sunlight moved across the floor. Life wasn't louder. It was deeper. In American culture, there's a quiet respect for personal pacing. No one pushed me to respond faster. No one judged my pauses. That freedom was unfamiliar and healing. I realized how often I had rushed myself more than anyone else ever did. No one was chasing me. I was chasing an invisible deadline. That deadline didn't belong to me. I inherited it from expectations, comparisons, fear. Letting go of rushing felt like stepping off a treadmill. At first, my legs kept moving out of habit. Then, slowly, they relaxed. I carried this lesson into difficult conversations. Instead of demanding answers now, I allowed time. Instead of solving everything today, I allowed tomorrow. Time didn't weaken connection. It strengthened it. I also noticed something surprising. When I stopped rushing, my motivation didn't disappear. It improved. I wanted to learn English not to catch up, but to connect. I wanted to improve my marriage not to fix it, but to honor it. Purpose replaced pressure. In the US, planning creates space for slowness. When you know what matters, you don't rush what doesn't. That's the secret. Planning isn't about controlling life. It's about protecting what deserves time. I used to think slowing down meant falling behind. Now I see it often means catching up with yourself. That morning ended like any other day. But something had shifted quietly inside me. I stopped measuring life by speed. I started measuring it by presence. If you're watching this and feel constantly tired, ask yourself gently, what are you rushing toward? And more importantly, who are you rushing past? Life doesn't need to be faster to be meaningful. It needs to be intentional. That's what America taught me, not through words, but through pace. And once I stopped rushing my life, I finally felt like I was living it. The conversation we almost didn't have. There was a conversation that waited for the right moment. Not because we planned it, but because we kept avoiding it. If you've been married long enough, you know this kind of conversation. The one that lives quietly between you. Not loud enough to cause a fight. Not small enough to ignore forever. In my third week in the US, that conversation finally showed up. It didn't arrive with drama. It came on an ordinary evening, after dinner, when the dishes were done and the house felt unusually calm. No phones. No TV. Just two tired people sitting at the same table they had sat at for years. Back home, moments like this often turned into silence. Or worse, into arguments about things that weren't really the problem. But America had already changed my pace. I wasn't rushing to fix. I wasn't rushing to defend. I wasn't rushing to win. I was just there. She spoke first. Not emotionally. Not accusingly. Just honestly. She said she felt lonely sometimes, even when we were together. That sentence landed slowly. Old me would have reacted fast. Explained. Justified. Solved. New me stayed quiet. In English, there's a simple phrase. Tell me more. I used it. She talked about routines that replaced connection. About days that felt efficient but empty. About how planning everything sometimes made her feel like another item on the list. That hurt, but it was true. I realized something uncomfortable. I had planned our life very well. But I hadn't planned space for feelings. In the US, I noticed couples schedule emotions the same way they schedule meetings. Date nights. Weekly check-ins. Time to talk, on purpose. At first, it felt artificial to me. Love shouldn't need reminders. Right? But reality disagreed. Psychologists say long-term relationships don't fail because of conflict. They fail because of emotional neglect. Not intentional neglect. Accidental neglect. That was us. We loved each other deeply. But we lived on autopilot. That evening, we spoke slowly. Sometimes we paused for a long time. No one rushed to fill the silence. Silence wasn't dangerous anymore. It was useful. I told her something I had never said clearly before. I said I was scared of stopping. Scared that if I slowed down, everything I built would fall apart. She didn't laugh. She understood. We both realized we were running, just in different directions. That conversation didn't solve everything. It wasn't magical. But it was intentional. In American culture, there's a belief that hard conversations deserve protected time. You don't squeeze them between tasks. You give them space. That night, I finally understood why Americans plan everything. Planning isn't cold. Avoidance is. Planning says, this matters enough to prepare for. I also noticed how my English changed during that conversation. I didn't search for perfect words. I used simple ones. I feel tired. I feel afraid. I don't want to lose us. Simple English. Honest meaning. And she understood everything. That's when it hit me again. You don't need advanced vocabulary to express truth. You need courage and clarity. Learning English through life, not textbooks, suddenly made sense. Our marriage didn't need better techniques. It needed better attention. That night, we agreed on something small. Once a week, we would sit like this. No agenda. No fixing. Just listening. We planned it, intentionally. And for the first time, planning felt romantic. The days after that conversation felt lighter. Not because problems disappeared, but because they were acknowledged. I noticed something else, too. When emotional weight lifts, motivation returns. I spoke English more confidently. I slept better. I felt present. Your nervous system relaxes when truth is spoken. Science backs this up. Studies show that emotional honesty reduces stress hormones and increases trust. In simple terms, talking heals more than silence ever could. I thought about how many people avoid difficult conversations because they are waiting for the right time. But the right time rarely appears on its own. You have to create it. That's what intention does. It doesn't guarantee comfort. It guarantees honesty. If you're watching this and feel distant from someone you love, ask yourself gently, what conversation are you postponing? And what would happen if you planned space for it? Not to argue. Not to blame. But to understand. That night didn't change our past. But it changed our direction. I realized something quietly powerful. A well-planned life isn't rigid. It's responsive. And a strong relationship isn't built on constant happiness. It's built on intentional truth. That conversation almost didn't happen. But because I slowed down. Because I learned from the American way of planning with purpose. We finally let it breathe. And sometimes, letting something breathe is how you save it. Living with intention, not perfection. On my last morning of the third week in the US, I woke up before the alarm again. Not because my body was trained, but because my mind felt calm enough to rest. That surprised me. I had always believed peace came after everything was done. After goals were reached. After problems were solved. But peace didn't wait for completion. It arrived when I stopped fighting the moment I was in. I sat by the window and watched the street come alive. People walking dogs. Cars stopping fully at stop signs. Someone jogging slowly. Not racing anyone. Nothing looked impressive. Yet everything looked intentional. That word followed me everywhere during those 3 weeks. Intentional. Americans don't plan because they love control. They plan because they understand limits. Time is limited. Energy is limited. Attention is limited. So they decide where it goes. I thought about my own life before coming here. How I tried to do everything at once. Be successful. Be present. Be strong. Be fast. I wanted perfection. And perfection exhausted me. Living with intention felt different. It asked quieter questions. What matters today? Who needs my attention now? What can wait? In my marriage, intention softened things. We still disagreed. We still misunderstood sometimes. But we stopped treating every issue like an emergency. We chose timing over intensity. That choice alone changed the tone of our relationship. I also noticed how intention changed my English. I stopped trying to sound smart. I focused on being understood. I spoke slower. I paused. I let silence exist. And strangely, people listened more. There's a lesson there. Perfection makes people tense. Presence makes people connect. In psychology, there's a concept called good enough living. It means functioning with care, not obsession. Research shows people who aim for perfection experience higher anxiety and lower satisfaction. People who live intentionally feel more grounded, even with flaws. That felt true in my body. I didn't suddenly become better at everything. I became kinder to myself. And that kindness gave me energy I didn't know I had. On that final day, my partner and I took a walk. No destination. No checklist. Just walking. We talked about small things. Then big ones. Then nothing at all. At one point, she said something simple. I feel like we're finally in the same moment. That sentence mattered more than any achievement. I realized something quietly important. A meaningful life isn't built by dramatic changes. It's built by small, repeated decisions. To pause. To plan. To pay attention. That's why Americans plan everything, not to trap life, but to protect it. When you know what matters, you stop wasting time proving things that don't. I thought about you, watching this. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you feel behind. Maybe you're learning English and wondering why progress feels slow. Let me say this gently. You don't need to rush your life to catch up. You need to choose it. Choose what deserves effort. Choose what deserves patience. Choose what deserves your heart. Learning English isn't about speed. It's about connection. Marriage isn't about perfection. It's about intention. Life isn't asking you to do more. It's asking you to be present with what you already have. As I packed my bags that day, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was taking something home. A new pace. A clearer mind. A softer way of living. The US didn't change who I am. It reminded me who I don't need to be. I don't need to rush. I don't need to impress. I don't need to have it all figured out. I just need to live on purpose. And that, I've learned, is enough. If you've stayed until this moment, it's probably not because you were looking for perfect English. It's because something here felt familiar. Maybe it was the tiredness, the rushing, the quiet fear that life is moving forward, and you're just trying to keep up. This story wasn't meant to teach you grammar. It was meant to remind you that real English lives inside real life. Inside love, mistakes, silence, and intention. You don't need to change everything today. You don't need to become a new person tomorrow. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is slow down and ask yourself one honest question. Am I living on autopilot, or with intention? In the next videos on this channel, I'll continue sharing real stories from life in the US. About language, marriage, culture, family, and the moments that quietly change us. No pressure. No fake motivation. Just slow, real English through real life stories. So you can listen, read, speak, and feel at the same time. If this video made you pause, if it made you feel seen, or if it gave you a little more courage to keep going, subscribe to the channel. Save this video for the days you feel rushed or lost. And leave a comment, even a simple one. Because someone else reading it might realize they're not alone. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the moment you decide to stay. See you in the next one.